Hello, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. So first I want to say I'm very, very impressed with the caliber of individuals here, both on the stage and off. It says a lot for Texas, and it says a lot for, I think, the future of liberty that this is what's going on here. So I want to thank all of you and thank all of you who came. Today, I think it's very appropriate, the story that I have to tell today. So whenever I speak, I like to tell stories. I think that storytelling is a bit of a lost art, and more we're starting to come to the realization, I think, through the world of podcasts and independent media, that people are realizing, oh, hey, these stories I actually learned something. This is how human beings learn. And the story that I want to tell today is a little bit about the why, which I think is often lost, especially among libertarians. We get the what. I think that's very, very clear by all of the presentations today, that we definitely get the what. There's so much agreement on what we actually need to do, about what is sort of, as Durkheim would say, what is the sacred and the profane, those things that we hold sacred. In particular today, I want to tell a little story in the context of, very appropriately, the Second Amendment. How could you come to Texas, speak at a libertarian event, and not talk about guns? I think that's something that, in particular, this state is really holding firm onto. And I think that it presents a much broader context. So we've got the what. I don't think I've heard a single person up here today. Okay, maybe I heard one person up here today, and it didn't necessarily go over too well, who was not a full 100% supporter of an individual's right to keep and bear arms. And that's something that the Libertarian Party has held very, very firm to. So we've got the what, but it's one of the few where we really disagree upon the why, it seems. And in thinking about this talk, and in doing some research for this talk, and in really trying to delve into a story that I understood a little bit, I realized that the why for us is actually a jumping off point for a much larger discussion. So I want to get to telling that story today. So, the Second Amendment, very interesting, probably the most interesting of all amendments in the Bill of Rights, because it is actually the only one, appropriately enough, that has a why. You may not realize that. It's the only one. All the rest of them just enumerate the rights and say that the government shall not touch them. But one of them actually lays out a why. And I don't think that that's by mistake. So, the text, of course, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the right of the people shall not be infringed. Why? Explicitly why? Well, because a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. And this is going to be a big conversation. This has already been a bit of a conversation on the stage, even within the last hour. The big conversation is about scope. I don't think that the side that is trying to have quote-unquote gun control, for the most part, the discussion has not risen to the level, really truly risen to the level of let's take away the guns. Let's take away all the guns. But what it's been is it's been a scope discussion. And the reason that that scope discussion has come up, scope meaning, well, when they wrote it, it was for a militia. And we don't need militias anymore. And anyway, the militia that they were talking about at the time, the guns that they were using were only muskets, so it's all about this why. And if we don't understand this why, first, why was the why even put in there? And then what the hell does the why even mean? This is our ammunition. this is what I want to talk about. I want to tell a story. And it's a broad story because it's a story about the American identity. It's a story that goes to the heart of what is the project. I call it a philosophical experiment, this country that we're living in. Because that's what separates it from everywhere else. It's not about ethnicity or bonds of blood. It's not about language groups. It's not about some mythological, like if you were to go to Scandinavia. There's a mythological story about how those people ended up there. That's not here. This is a planned experiment. So let's talk a little bit about how this experiment gets started. It starts well before this, but they say that this is the moment. How many people here have heard of King Philip's War? Good. It's about right. It's about right. And it's interesting that here we are in a context of a libertarian context where we often bring up the Constitution. We often bring up the Declaration of Independence. And yet, historians of American history, and particularly American political theory, say this is the moment when they could say that the American identity, what it is to be an American, happened right here, 1675. Now, you may note that is 100 years before the Declaration of Independence. This experiment was already going on. Because what is it when you're in school, especially if you're in public school? American history, right? The Pilgrims, they left from England on the Mayflower. They land. It's 1620. Something, something, something happens. Something, something, something. We don't know what that something is. 1776, maybe you get the Boston Tea Party. A little bit before that, right? That's 150 years. And as we talk about those things that we hold as victories of libertarianism, at least in our lifetime, right? Marriage equality. We're working on cannabis. These things, even as we've spoken about them today, the indication is that, well, we're just trying to get the law to the place that the culture is already at. The politics is a lagging indicator. We're not going to get marijuana decriminalization or legalization if the culture's not already there. What we're really talking about here in terms of legislation is, no, we're behind the culture. Let's at least catch up to the present. It's not about being progressive in any way. It's just like the culture's already there. Let's get there. So 1776, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Do you really think that an entire country full of people would have signed on to a philosophical experiment that they didn't already agree with? So wouldn't it be a good idea to know what the hell started this whole thing off? That's the story I want to talk about. And it deals with guns. And it's the reason why the Second Amendment is written the way that it is. So, 1620, Pilgrims land. Pilgrims land in the middle of what is essentially a war zone. They land in 1620. I'll turn this off so that it's not super distracting. They land in 1620. Now, from 1618 until that current time, that area had been ravaged by plague. And there's basically an ongoing war that's been happening for centuries on what is this coast that goes from southern Massachusetts through Rhode Island, through Connecticut. And there's 4 major tribes. All the way to the east, there's the Wampanoag tribe. That's the land that they land in Plymouth. That belongs to the Wampanoag. As you go through Rhode Island, that's the Narragansett. Then as you move through Connecticut, there's 2 tribes, the Pequot and the Mohegan. They're always fighting each other. So this plague has gone through. It's basically blown apart the Wampanoag, destroyed them. This is what they land in. They land in this weird sort of wasteland. As a matter of fact, Plymouth is founded on basically a destroyed village that was completely ravaged by plague. They find skeletons all over the place. They don't know what. You could imagine landing in this situation and you walk in, it's total Mad Max. Here are these cities, the fields are cleared. There's still like old marks of where these buildings were. There's no people, there's skeletons. So the Wampanoags have been torn up. And they've got this chief, who maybe is the reason why America, he's a very important person, Massasoit. So now this just goes into this story is told basically as the first Thanksgiving, but it's a lot more complex than that. This guy has on his border the Narragansett tribe. Basically all of what is Rhode Island now, those were the borders of the Narragansett tribe. They have been untouched by the plague. The Wampanoag have basically been wiped out. And the Narragansett are threatening to take over all the Wampanoag lands. So Massasoit, the chief of basically the people who are occupying this area of Massachusetts, he sees, hey, here are these new people who have landed. They seem to have some weapons. They kind of don't know what the hell they're doing, but they have some technological advancement. I need protection from the Narragansett. So he goes and he forms a treaty with them. Here's where the guns come in. This is the first step of the American attachment to the firearm. The Wampanoags come, they make peace. Let's see. This is Massasoit right here. This is a depiction of him making peace with the governor of the Plymouth colony. The Narragansett decide, no, we're still going to go to war. 1621, they send a sheath of arrows wrapped in a snakeskin to the people at Plymouth. Now, they've had a rough time. They've been helped out a lot by the natives, the Wampanoags who were there. But they know, okay, this could potentially be something bad coming. That's the idea that they're told. So what they send back is they send the snakeskin back, and they send it back with musket balls and powder. So they get sent a snakeskin sheath full of arrows, which is basically means in their culture, we're coming for you. You allied with our enemies, we're coming for you. They send back the same snakeskin with black powder and musket balls in it. And the Narragansett don't attack. Peaceful keeping and bearing of arms, for the first time, 1 year into what would be the American experience, the display of the firearm saves Plymouth colony. This is how far back this idea goes. This is the why. So, a basic peace is reached for quite a while. This is 1620. So, the native tribes go about their business, and a war breaks out between the Narragansett, so over between what's Rhode Island and Connecticut, 1636, about 16 years in, war breaks out between the Pequot people and the Narragansett. This time, the Narragansett reach out. They've been doing a little trading, and they're like, hey, we want these strong individuals on our side. They've got these guns. So they're like, come with us against the Pequot. And the colonists have expanded a little bit. Colonists expand, go with the Narragansett, wipe the Pequot out. And when I say wipe out, I mean they wiped out the people. And I don't just mean wipe out metaphorically. At the end of the war, they took all the people, put them into slavery. Some were sold off to Barbados, some were given to the other tribes, and then they passed a treaty saying that the Pequot name could never even be used again. 1637, they wiped a people off the map and out of history. They said everybody now belongs to another tribe. Pequot are gone. The Narragansett see this, now this was their allies, and you're like, hey, this is kind of the beginning of American foreign policy. This is really interesting. God, it goes that far back? Maybe there's something deeper here. So the Narragansett look at this and they're like, they're crazy. We're never dealing with these crazy people ever again. The Narragansett close in. What has essentially happened at this point is that the Pilgrims, because of their basic structure, which was congregationalist, right? So they had a decentralized, almost tribal structure from the beginning. They fell right into becoming just one of the tribes of this area. And they just were essentially the most powerful tribe. They were fundamentally organized like these people. They were using their same agricultural techniques, which they had been taught. A fur trade starts up. They're hunting. They're buying furs. They're actually a very interesting sort of side note on this is that legal tender, very early on, is the legal tender of the native people, wampum, which you could say it's kind of a proto-blockchain. It's these beads that are in order that are used for recording title, recording the terms of contracts. And then they're like, oh, hey, this is actually a store of value. It's relatively rare. It can only be made from these very specific shells. It takes a long time to make them. We string them together. It tells a story. There's an actual language, a lot like a software language that is taught among these people of how to read this wampum if you ever have questions, these long beads. And so they start trading them. It actually becomes legal tender. Now, the Dutch ruin it because the Dutch figure out how to make it much faster, and basically inflation takes over, and then it doesn't work. Very early example of how to have an alternative currency. They even have it from these people. And the Indians start to buy guns from them as well. They form in 1643. They have an Articles of Confederation. They form the United Colonies of New England. 1643, first experiment with this. This is where the Second Amendment comes in. This is where the militia word becomes very important in this whole thing. See, they didn't have a standing army this whole time. And all of the tactics and all of their ideal of who should fight was being based upon fighting these wars alongside these native people, which meant that every man of fighting age was essentially a warrior. And every man was supposed to be armed, and every man of fighting age was supposed to take up arms if need be. So they made this compact that said, if any one of us goes to war or gets attacked, everybody else will attack. And this was their structure: decentralized, non-hierarchical, tribal, in concert back and forth with these tribes. So after they knock out the Pequot, things go really, really well. There's general peace. Until 1675, Massasoit, he lived for a very, very long time. His son, Metacomet, who was also known as Philip, had been raised in this new environment. So in this new environment, around 1675, you figure the Pilgrims landed in 1620. Everybody that's there who had been there and not come over from England, they've been living in this new culture, both the native people and the colonists. But they're not really colonists anymore. Not if some of them have been there 3 generations now. Metacomet is just as used to dealing with these white people as anyone else. He's been around them his entire life. But another plague breaks out. And he decides that the Indians are down to about 10,000 people. The colonists at this point are at about 80,000 people. He decides he's going to go with the Narragansett, and that they are going to eliminate and take back the land from these people in these colonies. Does not turn out that way. I mean, by this time, these people had figured out this landscape. They were operating as natives in this place. So every man of fighting age got together. This is considered the deadliest war in American history if you take it to before, for Americans. 1 out of 10 1 out of 10 men of fighting age was killed in this war. The natives were basically wiped out. The Wampanoag people, destroyed. The Narragansett people, destroyed. The Mohegans were smart enough to go with them. Well, they're still around. They've got a casino in Connecticut, Mohegan Sun. Good decision, at least they're still around, right? So the American ideal of a militia being the key. Now, England never came to help. No help from the government. These were normal people defending land that was rightfully theirs, that they were born on, that they were bred on. This idea did not leave. The idea that we are here because of our ability to defend ourselves, from whatever that may be. So, you look at it again. In that context, these people at the time drawing back to see those things that were the reason why they were still there. A well-regulated militia, well, we get that. Being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So we've got the why of the militia, a historical context and an understanding that there are times when the government is either unwilling or unable to protect you, and if you can't protect yourself, you're gone. And the militia wasn't some separate organization. The militia was an ad hoc sort of cultural phenomenon that happened whenever the culture was threatened with violence. Every man of fighting age was a member of the militia. That meant every family was a supporter of the militia. That meant the whole people are the militia. It's not separate from the people. The next thing, so we said there's a why. There's something else in here that's unique across the whole document of the Constitution. What's a free state? What is that? So a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. Only time that term is ever used in the Constitution. It's not defined. And it's not to say necessary to these United States. It doesn't say necessary to the security of the states. That's used in the Bill of Rights, the states. 10th Amendment. Right? Anything that's not delegated to the federal government is reserved for the states or the people. They're not talking about the states. They're talking about a free state. They're talking about a concept. What is a free state? A free state is that state. This is my belief of this. A free state is the answer to this. Who'll build the roads? And the security that they're talking about is a much greater security than the security that you get from the guns. It's the security that comes from knowing the answer to this question. Because if you can't answer this question, you can't be free. Because if the question is, who will keep us safe? And if your answer isn't, I will, you're not free. That's what the Second Amendment means. That's what the history is. That's the why. The why is about a notion of self-sufficiency. The why is about an understanding that these people had of the idea that had we not been able to defend ourselves, we wouldn't be writing this document. We wouldn't be having this conversation. And if we ignore the history of who we are, which particularly as libertarians, libertarianism is an American phenomenon. And it's something that was born in this very specific environment, that evolved in a very, very specific environment. A collision of two cultures at a specific time, trying out some strategies that happen to work. And you know what? That's how evolution works. Sometimes you just stumble onto an idea. That's why the American experience is a unique experience, because it was an idea. These ideas were stumbled upon. It's not self-evident, and there's no reason to believe that it would have happened otherwise. The rest of the world was in monarchy. It could have stayed in monarchy for 2,000 to 3,000 years. It's not self-evident that this was just going to pop up on its own. That's not how it happens. We know that's not how technology moves forward, and this is a technology. I want to talk about this concept, because I think that this is the key. If what I've said makes any sense, if what I've just said resonates in any way, that there may be some truth, and I'm not talking about absolute truth, because we don't know absolute truth, and we're here searching for more truth. We're here trying to get a better handle day by day on what this thing called liberty is. I think that's why we're here. I think we're trying to experience and to explore what is our culture. What is this culture that we were blessed with, and this really weird, really interesting notion that somehow popped out of the ether, but somehow freed the whole world, this really cool thing that we've got called liberty. And what is it? So if anything that I've said makes sense, if that makes sense, I want to talk about this concept. Satyagraha, it's a Sanskrit word. Satya, it's a combined word. Satya means truth, and agraha means a firm insistence on or holding on to, the idea of holding on to truth. Holding truth. Yet another thing that may sound familiar, and we'll get into that as well. It was actually, though, it's not an American concept, or is it? Satyagraha, term coined by Mahatma Gandhi when they asked him, "What are you doing here?" Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement picked up Gandhi's ideas of how he had basically, almost single-handedly, freed India from the yoke of the British. He called it civil disobedience, nonviolent resistance. They brought those terms up to Gandhi. And Gandhi was like, no, that's actually not what I'm doing. I'm holding on to the truth. That's what I'm doing. Just that. This is a picture of him. I won't go deeply into this story, but it is one that you should know as a libertarian. This is a picture of Gandhi. He's marching to the coast, 240 miles from his ashram, 24-day trip, 10 miles a day, wearing that, and he's going to go make salt. And this was what freed all of India. The British had levied a monopoly. They'd created a monopoly on salt production. It was actually illegal for an average Indian to possess salt. And it was definitely illegal to manufacture it, even by evaporation of seawater. This was contributing to all kinds of problems in India, including iodine deficiencies among just average Indian people. And Gandhi said, but salt comes from the ocean, and we've been doing this for a long time. The truth of the matter is, you don't have a monopoly on salt. And so we marched. Millions of Indians followed after he did this, 80,000 of whom within the next few months were imprisoned, including Gandhi. That same year, he was named Times Man of the Year. This is considered the moment that India became free. In many ways, it's their Declaration of Independence, which was written by Gandhi. It's called the Purna Swaraj. Might sound a little familiar. He may have taken some notes on how you get free. We believe it is the inalienable right of the Indian people, as of any other people, to have freedom and to enjoy the fruits of their toil and have the necessities of life so that they may have full opportunities of growth. We believe also that if any government deprives the people of these rights and oppresses them, the people have a further right to alter it or abolish it. That same meme, man, same idea that comes up in this weird little place, this weird little cold, nasty little outpost in the middle of tribal Indian wars, and these weird religious zealots freeze India. That's why it's worth exploring. So, holding on to truth. Satyagraha. Gandhi wasn't the first to do it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. This is the beginning of the game. That's why they start there. So here are the rules. When you look at this document, the important, and we're going to go over the truths that they hold to be self-evident. One important thing, go back, look at this document. Look at the way it's originally written. We say it so we don't think about this. There's some real weird punctuation in there. And that punctuation is basically taking the form of that time of bullet points. Here's how this thing is meant to be read. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident truths, meaning, no, there's no arguing. This is like, what goes up must come down. 1 + 1 is 2. This is the place that we start. These are the first principles. 1, that all men are created equal. That they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Certain rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not the rights that they got were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Among the many unalienable rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We always stop there. Shouldn't surprise you in government school that they would stop there. We hold these truths to be self-evident that, yet another one, this one is self-evident to them. This is 1 + 1 = 2. That to secure these rights, the why, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The only reason for government is to protect the unalienable rights. That's the only reason. That's the rule. That's a rule of the game. No, this is self-evident too. This is a rule too. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends being to secure the rights, or taking more power than the governed consent to. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of it, so it doesn't matter if it's a democracy. It doesn't matter if you voted for it. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That's the free state. Because if you should so decide that the time has come to abolish your government and to start again, and at that moment you're in a free state, that's where the guns come in. Because you are very, very vulnerable at that moment. If you want to have a society that views the alteration and abolishment of a government as a possibility for them, therefore views freedom as a possibility for them, therefore is able to uphold the rules of this game, they must be armed, period. Period. If they're not, you're no longer free, the game has changed, and you might want to find the document that talks about the rules of the game that you're now playing, because you're not playing this one anymore. And it would probably be a good idea to know which one you're playing. I mean, I know where you can find those rules. At this point, there is a document. There are several documents written not by Thomas Jefferson, but by a gentleman named Marx. So when we're talking about rights and this idea carrying through, Declaration of Independence is often called a promise. So they started the rules of the game, and then they said, so here are the rules. Now let's have a hypothesis, and let's start this experiment rolling along. This is my favorite amendment and the most important. We talk about speech. We talk about religion. We talk about right against search and seizure, jury trial, cruel and unusual punishment. No one ever talks about the Ninth Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. If they had a time machine, I promise you, they would have put in the right to peacefully possess, consume, and grow plants. Now, they never would have imagined. Think about the historical context. Think about trying to say to one of these guys, hey, if we don't put in the right to grow plants on your own property and possess them and consume them, the government's going to take them away. They would have been like, dude, ink is expensive, bro. We don't need this. Nobody's ever going to do that. Are you kidding me? This is the why. So, are we talking about those rights? And have we moved beyond the game? And this is where we have to have a movement forward. Because it's not just about, hanging our hats on the idea that, yeah, we're the righteous. We are absolutely the righteous. I'm going to make a call to action. And this is my own call, and this is what I'm working toward. I'm going to make a call to action to consider this the next version and the next step in the experiment, and to decide that we're going to, one, keep it going, and two, we're going to find the places where it's fallen apart, and that we're going to take our own place in this generation in history, because I think this is the generation that can take that place, and that we are going to fight back the tyranny that's arisen. We're going to push for a free state, and whether that's to alter the government, whether that's to abolish the government, whatever it is, that we're going to go ahead and just have this experiment continue. Let's call it a satyagraha for the Libertarian Party. Let's hold on to some truth. This is our action. This is my personal suggestion. If you like it, take it. If not, at least there's the why now. At least we've laid it out. I believe this falls in line with the why. These two actions. If we're going to play the political game, if we're not just going to tear it all down, and I don't think it should be all torn down. I'm all for a stateless society. That's where I want to be. But that's an orientation for me. That's not a destination. My challenge for anybody who is not about a stateless society and thinks that there should be government is build a government that I would be happy with. Build the government that I would be happy with. So let's see if some other people would be happy with this. Decriminalization and enshrinement. I believe this is the only role for the Libertarian Party. I believe this is it. This is the satyagraha. Nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. Two things. You're elected or you vote. You're voting on two things. You're presenting bills for two things. Decriminalization and enshrinement. Decriminalization, complete removal of entire activities from the criminal code. So what I'm talking about here is I should see as much mention of marijuana in the criminal code as I see of spinach. That's the destination. Complete removal. Now, you may have to take piece by piece by piece, but know the why. It's not just good enough until it's there. And then enshrinement, which is a very, very unique aspect of our political culture, which is what the Bill of Rights is to say, here are the things that the government cannot touch. So first, take them out of the criminal code, and then define the boundaries upon which the government may not touch. Expand the free state. Expand it. And expand it through a persuasion toward the people. That requires our own responsibility of creating some alternatives that people can see. That's beyond just the political sphere. We've got to be in the private sphere as well. If we're saying, oh, well, I don't want, I think the public schools are terrible. I really don't see us reaching out and trying to create a better option that that the culture could follow. And that the people would be willing to jump out of it. And the people would be willing to say, oh no, the government doesn't touch school. Or let's start building some roads, maybe. But certainly to defend ourselves. Certainly to defend ourselves. So, decriminalization in this case is the what, enshrinement is the why. I would suggest that if we're going to decriminalize, that every single bill has a why. That there's a reason why we are taking this out. For me, my why, and again, take it if you like it, but this one works for me, and I have found that most people can agree. I do not have the right to violently restrict another individual's ability to live in peace. Why is that powerful? Well, because part of the rules of the game is all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Well, one of my unalienable rights is not to violently restrict your peaceful activities. Now, if you can get somebody to agree that you don't, so if I say, hey, do you agree that I don't have the right to violently restrict your peaceful activities, Eric? And all men are created equal? Well, it sounds like it's done to me. You don't have the right to restrict his activities, and him to him, and her to him. That sounds like a pretty damn good starting place. So, every single issue. I do not have the right to violently restrict another adult individual's ability to peacefully grow, possess, and consume plants, possess whatever kind of property they want to, move peacefully through common areas, educate their children as they see fit, purchase and consume the beverage of their choice, etc., etc., etc. I do not have the right to violently restrict another individual's ability to peacefully keep and bear arms, period. Period. It's across the board. That's the why. It doesn't matter if it's a bump stock. It doesn't matter if it's automatic. It doesn't matter if you use it for hunting. None of that matters. We have a unique and wonderful little meme that runs through our culture, and it's the meme of liberty. It evolved in a very specific time and place, and it's given so much to the world, and there is so much for us yet to learn. So much. And if anything, we have a responsibility if we want to see how this experiment plays out. If we don't want it to end, we have a responsibility to take and hold on to truth. Hold on to the truths and say we see these to be self-evident. And when we speak to people, it's to speak to them with the why. The idea of license, of liberty, not of license, not of what I can get away with. It's not, I have a right to own a gun because I have those rights. That's not going to be good enough to win this fight. And it is, I do believe, as of the last 2 weeks, it is a fight now. And I do believe that it is very, very close. I mean, I am not someone who is an alarmist, but I do see with what's going on that We are very, very close to playing a completely other game. I'm not so sure that that game is going to be better than the game that we're playing. So, there it is. There's the why and the what and the way that we can communicate it to other people. That should not be a provocative picture to an American. The only reason that it may be provocative to some at this moment is because we haven't yet told the story that needs to be told. And if we can tell the story about who we are, even if it's just to our children, even if it's just to each other, and let it spread, it's spread on its own already. The truth doesn't need anything more than just you holding onto it. Just hold on, that's it. Even in the face of difficult and uncomfortable conversations with people who you think may not agree with you, believe me, they agree with the truth. And they're just waiting for you to unpack it and open it up to them. So, with that, I thank you very much for having me here. I thank you all for your attention. That's it. Thank you.